tells me I'm not enough, I have a physical and an emotional reaction. How about you?
Yeah.
Yeah? And why I have that reaction, I think, is because there's some part of me that always knows, in spite of what is coming at me, that I don't feel like enough. That I don't believe that. I actually don't believe that. So Sarah asked me to give a talk on, do I matter? Do you matter? Does citizen science matter? Does the work you're doing here today and out in your community matter? So I hope that I can give you some insight on that. And because I have menopausal brain, I can't remember everything, so I'm going to look at my notes so I really get it right. And it's dark up here. So this is participatory, and I have 3 exercises you're going to help me with. Now you guys can do this, even though I know many of you don't have anything to write with. I know you might have your phones, but I'm going to ask you to write down or remember 7 words. Can you do that? And they're going to be your words. Raise your, let me get, can you hear you? Can you do that? 7 words. For the next 30 minutes, you can do 7 things for me, right? I didn't hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, this side of the room?
Yeah.
Okay. No, come on.
Yeah.
Alright. The first activity I'm going to have you do is I want you to think of 3 names. 3 names. You should easily remember these names. You're going to think or write down or tap into your phone the top 3 people that you love. Okay? I'm going to give you 30 seconds. The top 3 people that you love. 30 seconds. I know you're asking what does this have to do with water, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to make it all come together. Top 3 people that you love. Raise your hand if you got that. Shouldn't take you very long. If you can't name 3 people, then you need to meet me outside afterwards. In fact, if you can't name 3 people, just put my name as one of them. That'd be totally cool. Alright, now I'm going to come back to that at the very end, and when we close with activity. So I always like to use symbology in my talks, and so I decided to use a bicycle wheel as my symbology today. And to talk about the value of citizen science. So first of all, citizen science, community science, there's a lot of terms out there, volunteer monitoring. All I'm talking about when I say that word is everyday citizens like yourself. Whether you own a restaurant, you're a farmer, you are a janitor, you're a lawyer, everyday citizens are engaged in doing science in their community. That's the definition I'm using. So in the symbolization with this tire, if we are individuals, we're all, let's just say the spokes on this tire are all of us individually. Okay? And together, when we work together, we actually can support this whole tire, this whole wheel. And you can name the wheel anything you want. I'm going to call, when we work together in community science, we actually create the wheel around here that if you were to tap to some sort of device and sit on it, it would move you forward. It would move the world forward. Okay? So I'm going to share with you 3 reasons community science makes a difference. And you're all engaged in community science. The first reason community science makes a difference is because it actually generates data and discovery that would never exist otherwise. And I'm going to tell you some stories about how that's true. That go way, way, way back. So now I want you to imagine this is your assignment. Your assignment is you need to do what's called a tide experience. A tide. The tides, you know, the ocean comes up and back tides. You with me? Yeah. Show some body movements. I know you're with me. Very good. Okay. Your job is to come up with an experiment that you're going to engage 9 nations on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, and you've got to engage thousands of people at 650 stations to gather data for a 2-week period, looking at tides twice a day. And it's 1837. There's no phones. There's no email. I don't even think snail mail was there. Follow me? That's what this gentleman did in 1837. His name was William Wellwell. I don't say his name right probably. But he did that in 1837. That's citizen science. He gathered millions and millions of data points to show that a tide in London is actually connected to a tide in Boston. He's the founder, basically, of the science of tidology. Before that, we navigated the oceans using what?
The stars?
Just the stars. Just the skies. He also contributed, this is a little fun fact, he coined a lot of terms. He coined the term ions, cathodes, anodes. He coined the term scientist. In those days, there was no such thing as a profession of science. It didn't exist. Science was reserved for people who were wealthy, who had free time, and had a little curiosity. Charles Darwin wasn't a scientist. He was just a naturalist that got to be on a ship and take notes. So Mr. Wellwell, he coined this term scientist because there wasn't any term like that. If you were interested in science in those days, you were called a man of science. And he had a female peer whose name was Mary Somerville, and he didn't want to call her a man of science. So he gave her coined the term scientist in 1833. So you could say the first person to be called scientist was a woman. Pretty cool. So the other thing that his work generated was the first time really in all these examples and stories I'm giving you are just the tip of the iceberg. They're just an example. But it was through work like that, citizen science work, that brought the level of science from a hobbyist game to the level that it benefits society, that governments were actually getting engaged in funding it equal to other societally benefit issues. Now, Mr. Wellwell here got an award from the Royal Society of London for his work. And that you can still get awards from there today. And the funny thing about his reward back in the 1830s was it's a very elitist award. It's very, very elitist into this little private kind of society of little scientists. But his work was completed with not only thousands of documented boatmen and citizens, he didn't even crunch the numbers. He got a bunch of volunteers to crunch the numbers, as Sarah was saying, using math. But he called those people, let me get the term right, subordinate laborers. But this was the beginning of science becoming kind of an elitist thing. I like to nickname this whole era that we're still in, the publish, perish, copyright rule. It began this era of who gets to create knowledge and who gets access to knowledge. Now, I don't know if you guys know this, but I know the adults in the room know this, but this publish-perish model that academia has, that government has, with our taxpayer dollars a lot of the times, where they create studies and write papers, and then they have peer-reviewed things that they're subscriptions to. They decide when we get the data, when we get to see the report. It's really private. But this was the beginning of that culture in the 1830s. So Mr. Wellwell did citizen science by collecting data. It's another gentleman in his era named Matthew Maury. He studied astronomy and meteorology and oceanography. Back in the day, they called those people polymaths when they studied a lot of things. This gentleman didn't generate data. He mined data. So back then, we had no way to know where the winds and the tides and the currents were going. And it used to take, picture this, San Francisco. It used to take a year to float a ship from San Francisco to New York. A whole year. And what he did is in these ships, they would keep these meticulous logs on wind and temperature and all this information. He went and mined all that data, and in 5 years, he had the first wind currents of the North Atlantic Ocean, which led to the other ocean current, thermal currents, patterns of whales, which were important for hunting, storms, and things like that. He's attributed to saving millions of lives and creating basically the ocean commerce. If you think about what we need to navigate the ocean, now we don't think about that as in Colorado, but he did it by mining existing data as a citizen scientist, if you will. Now let's think about what was going on in America in 1776. What was going on in America in 1776? And who was president? Nope, nobody was because it was 1776. We weren't a country yet. Actually, I didn't even know he was asking a trick question, but good call. Thomas Jefferson was around then. He was interested in citizen science. I thought this was fascinating. He wanted to deputize every person in Virginia with a thermometer, a wind vane, and instructions to take temperature and wind direction daily. Now, why would Thomas Jefferson care about citizen science like that? Well, we weren't a country yet. And in Europe, he was trying to dispute claims that temperature and humidity in the New World was going to produce weaker, smaller, and inferior animals. I think that's funny. You can laugh, it's okay. He didn't get to finish this citizen science experience because the American Revolution kind of occupied his time. But what he did say, he said a nation can never be both ignorant and free. I want you to think about how these things apply to today. A nation can be no ignorant and free, that freedom requires an intelligent, informed populace, capable and willing to learn beyond press and the public education. His vision for collective science relied on people having a sense of civic duty and claiming their right to be informed and educated in order to self-govern. Now that's in 1776. Think about 1800, but I just told you how science started to get privatized, and the keepers of those science decided who got to generate that information, and how we as people access it. Let's move closer to Colorado in 1998. Some of you may remember in Fort Collins, North Fort Collins, there was a flood. And it actually flooded our property at Parks and Wildlife, not too far from CSU there. In 1998, it was a tributary to the Poudre River, and that flood happened on Spring Creek there, and the weather stations that were right around that did not accurately predict that flood. It cost 5 people their lives and a lot of millions of dollars in damage. Has anybody here heard of Koukaros? I'm not saying that right. Koukaros? Raise your hand if you heard of Koukaros. That is when that was invented by Nolan Doskin. Koukaros stands for the Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network, where people that are 3 years older until they die, actually, there's a lot of these members, for 20-some years now, just collect simple weather data. Data that weather stations that everybody else has doesn't characterize those local events. Local knowledge is always as important and complementary to traditional science. Right now, Koukaros is in 50 states and all provinces, involves 20,000 people, and here's who uses this citizen science data. Meteorologists, claims adjusters, attorneys, construction businesses, utility companies, mosquito control experts, farmers, snow removal companies, and urban planners. That data is very, very, very valuable. Now I'm going to whip through a bunch of disciplines where citizen science has made a difference. Ornithologist is the study of birds, birders. Birding is a serious hobby. Do not get in the middle of a birder and their birds. If you don't know any ornithologists, any birders. Ornithologists collected millions and millions. These are citizen science. These are everyday people. Millions and millions of records on birds nesting. And it was one of the first studies that documented climate change impact to wildlife. And what they documented is that birds are laying their eggs earlier and earlier. More than 20 species, because they had millions and millions of records to look at. Something that no agency, nobody could collect. And they documented this thing called a trophic mismatch. So if you're a bird and you're going to lay eggs, you got to build your nest, you got to lay your eggs, and you got to incubate. At the time when your babies come out, you want it to be the best food source out there. And what do birds eat? They eat insects. A lot of insects. And insects correlate to temperature and precipitation. They peak. Winter mosquitoes are the worst. Are they the worst in the winter? So their food source peaks. And as birds were reacting to laying their eggs early so their babies would have the best McDonald's, if you would, they're missing that. And they're laying their eggs early and early, and they're still missing that food source. So their babies aren't doing as well, they're not reproducing as many, and so there's a decline in these bird populations. So it was citizen scientists who used that nesting data that got tied to temperature and precipitation. Entomology. We don't have bad mosquito problems here, although we do have West Nile virus. But all over the country, citizen scientists, there's one thing that's really difficult to do, and that's to identify a smashed mosquito. So there's these ways to capture mosquitoes so that you can identify the real deadly species and map where all the diseases are happening and then do appropriate control. One example of entomology. There's a whole nother story that's fascinating about ladybugs that I don't have time to tell, but involves ladybugs. Astronomy. This is one person who lives in New Zealand. Her name was Jane McCormick. In 2005, she discovered a planet that were thousands of light years from Earth. She's discovered meteors, fireballs, comets, and solar systems. All by using an amateur telescope that professionals never would see. There's a lot of competition for these super powered telescopes, so the professional people get to sign up and use them, and they're only like watching them for whatever their little project is. But amateur folks are watching their stuff all the time. So huge discoveries in astrology from citizen science. Biochemistry. Things like DNA and RNA and genetics and a lot of things in biochemistry. The story I want to tell you there is the connection between crowdsourcing and gaming. In biochemistry, how many of you guys thought you could play your games and actually contribute to science? I'm telling you right now, you can do it. There's at least a dozen organizations out there that create these crowdsourcing gaming environments to generate solutions that computers cannot do alone. It requires the interaction of what teams do and what humans do to think together. So there's at least, you can look this up, at least 12 crowdsourcing gaming organizations that you play games to generate scientific solutions around genetics and things like that. I thought that was super fascinating. One of the interesting things about that whole effort is when they started to analyze the teams that were winning, it wasn't the teams that were the smartest, that had the most fastest thumbs or whatever it is you use when you game. It was the teams that had the most diversity, both in women and men, and in skill sets, and that knew how to listen to each other and value each other. Those were the qualities that made the comprising team. Are those qualities that we could use today in our world, you think? Yeah, I thought that was really fascinating. Now, microbiology, here's a good story. So I used to play basketball, and I was really good at basketball, but the cheerleaders never came to our games. They always went to boys' games. So I always had to think about cheerleaders. But professional cheerleaders, about 300 of them, for the Sacramento Kings, the Oakland Raiders, and the Philadelphia 76ers in 2014, that were actually in school for STEM careers, so science, technology, engineering, and math. So cheerleaders, going to learn STEM stuff, wanted to make a difference on learning about microbes. We actually don't know very much about all the microbes in our environment. So this is all the germs in your gut, on your pillow, in your sink, on your toilet, at the grocery store, on your neighbor's chair, on your neighbor's pen, your neighbor's water bottle. I could get really gross. That would be fun. So these cheerleaders at these national basketball leagues, baseball games, and football games, you know how they shoot cannons up with the t-shirts into the stands? They put these micro kits in them, shot them up into the stands, and got more than 4,000 to 8,000 kits out there for people to take these little micro swabs of all these places in their house, and they started to identify the microbes that we have around our world, which has now contributed to this anti-hygiene theory that we have going. And this anti-hygiene theory, so we have an increase in incidence of autoimmune diseases, type 1 diabetes, eczema, allergies, all because of the hygiene hypothesis that we've overcleaned. We killed off some good bacteria. That correlates to the 2000 belly button biodiversity study. Here's a visual for you. So, this one group of citizen science got 60 swabs of people's belly button lint. And here's what they discovered. 2,300 types of bacteria. Ooh, that's the right response. Ooh. About 60 were fairly common, and about 8 were common in everybody. And they further tried to study, was there genetic differences, gender differences, geographic differences, But they've learned a lot about bacteria in our own bodies. And the last one to demonstrate, this is all data that would never exist. That's what my point is. This is data that would never ever exist. Is my Turtles and Nurdles project I want to tell you about, because there was at least one plastics project. So sea turtles are endangered. And there's some mothers are part of this network in North Carolina that every morning they would go out during the turtle nesting season to count the turtles. So sea turtles walk up onto the beach. They're not very nurturing moms. They lay their eggs in the sand and then they leave and they never see their baby again. It's not a Disney movie. So these mothers would go out day after day and during that season to watch and count these eggs. And they noticed all the trash that was around the beach. And it baffled them because there's trash cans everywhere. And when the beach was full and everyone was on the beach, they could see, it's like the trash blended in with the people. And then the people would leave, and there'd be all this trash. So they decided, why not? We're just sitting here watching sand. Let's collect all that trash. So they started collecting it for years, and they started categorizing it and putting it in different categories. And scientists found out about that, and they came up with these, there's this classification of plastics called nurdles. Have you ever heard of nurdles? And it's plastic that breaks down into those little pebbles. And the scientists started analyzing these little nurdles and found that they were full of PCBs, DDT, and fire retardant, these organics that are bad for us. And who is eating? Where does that trash go when it's not put in the trash can on the beach? It goes into the ocean. It gets washed in the ocean when the tide comes up because of that guy that did that tide thing. So that led to this international pellet project where citizens were collecting these nurdles all over the world, and they found high concentrations of plastics in New York City, in Tokyo, in London, where all of these big cities are. Now the plastics, before they break down, are not toxic. But there's something about plastic that draws those organics that are toxic. So plastics are not considered a hazardous waste, but just think about this. You are our future. If we would just classify plastics in 4 different categories of hazardous waste, in America, hazardous waste is regulated. How it's manufactured, how it's distributed, how it is cleaned up and taken care of, it would change the landscape of plastic 180 degrees. And we wouldn't have to even deal with straws and probably plastic bag bans. That would change the landscape right there. I'll leave that with your thought. Yes?
5 minutes.
No, that can't be true?
It has to be.
Okay. Fence line communities. These are communities that are links to toxic waste and toxic dumps. Industrial agriculture and things like that. They're now called fence line communities. Now, I'm just going to give you three names out there. These are all citizen scientists. Love Canal, 1978. Citizen science. Aaron Brockovich, who saw that movie? 1998, that was California, Pacific and Gas. Right now there's a movie in the theaters called Dark Waters. It's about DuPont in West Virginia, about a man who almost risks his life to save his town's water supply. True story. All that water in Detroit, all that situation, it was all citizen science. Okay. I'm proving to you that citizen science matters, am I?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I'm going to go back to a quick story on democratizing of science. That's the other gift of citizen science. It changes who generates the data and who has access to it. How many of you have listened to Reddit? Or you know what Reddit is? Raise your hand if you know what RSS, the feed, the online coding RSS is. How many know the name Aaron Swartz? You know Aaron Swartz? Aaron Swartz was one of the founders of the RSS feed in the 80s when he was a teenager. He was one of the founders of Reddit as a teenager. RSS is the reason we can do APIs and do a lot of share information today. Aaron Swartz is, in 2013, 26 years old, committed suicide. He was an advocate of public data and public science. And he had a subscription to a journal that he wanted everybody else to have access to, and so he made it accessible. To make a long story short, he was charged with like 13 felonies, $1 million in fines. He couldn't handle the pressure because the copyright industry was not going to let him share that information. And he wasn't profit motivated. He was an advocate of changing, democratizing information. All right, now what I need to do is jump. Because the last benefit of citizen science is called social capital. Science isn't going to fix our problems alone. We need social capital, and the social capital in the country is declining. If anybody ever read the book Bowling Alone, that was a documentation of how we don't do bowling anymore. But the real story behind that is how we don't do things in our communities anymore that bring us together. Whether it's coffee shops or bowling, or we do things that keep us separate but not together. And citizen science brings out social capital. Communities that have social capital are rich in, they have higher education levels, better governments, stronger economies, less crime, and they're healthier and happier. And there's research that shows people who do volunteer monitoring and water quality monitoring have higher social capital. All right, back to bringing this home. I started Riverwatch in 1989 because I saw a gap. And I was blown away that decisions were being made in our water with no data or little data. And I decided to get the power of students to go out there and do it. Because at the time, decisions were being made from fear and speculation, and that favors pollution, not clean rivers. It was Riverwatch data that some of you had a presentation on mining and metals. And my office is right outside the Animas River, and I lived the Gold King spill. I was out there monitoring it. It was Riverwatch data that the EPA used to determine that the river had gone back to pre-spill conditions. It was your data that they used. The list of impacts to the resource of Riverwatch data are too long to talk about. I want to just mention and now bring it back home to what I asked you to do earlier. It's the impact that doing this work has together on connection. The poster, the slogan for Riverwatch that I had from the very beginning is called, it says, "The care of rivers is not the question of rivers, but a question of the human heart." This program has never really been about science for me. It's always been about the human heart. Along the way, for 30 years, I've been doing this program, but if I had a dime for every time somebody told me this program didn't matter, I had a Water Quality Control Commissioner tell me their 12-year-old son couldn't do this. I've had the program defunded overnight. Overnight, just defunded. I've had people attack you because they were afraid of the decisions that what the data was going to make. And just a year ago, I had somebody tell me that I can no longer do Riverwatch at my job. After 30 years, I'm not allowed to do my program anymore. All of those things tell me I don't matter, and they're very, very personal. But I think I do matter. Right here in this room, you're going to give me 3 more minutes. Right here in this room, statistics would say, in this room with 100 people, right here in this room, there's a percentage of you in this room that maybe don't have enough food every day. There's a percentage of you that might be dealing or have dealt with domestic violence, physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. Someone that's dealing with addiction, or knows someone who is. Someone who's battling depression hasn't even thought of suicide. Someone who's been bullied, or maybe has been a bully. Someone who's not heterosexual, or is maybe dealing with feeling like they're in a different body than they were born with. You can name it, but all of those things society tells you you don't matter. So my question is, do you matter? Well, here's the 4th number I'm going to have you write down or think about. The number 4,200,000. This is the astrology in me. The minute you were born, if you looked up into the skies, if you did your little broken nick up there, the planets were in a formation that they will never be again for another 4,200,000 years. If you know anything about astrology, that tells you that you are unique. You are here for a reason to contribute to the better good of others and to connect with others. So I'm going to do one more exercise before we go.
Okay, buses have to leave.
You're going to like it. Okay, stand up. Everybody stand up. Oh, don't roll your eyes at me. This is interactive. All right, this is based on research. If you get 4 or less hugs a day, 4 or less hugs a day, sit down. No hugging. 4 or less hugs a day, sit down. Okay, if you get 11 to 4 hugs a day, sit down. I didn't say talk. I didn't say talk. That means if you're standing, you get 12 or more hugs a day. Is that true? We need to connect people. All right, look, these people, you guys stay standing, okay? Research shows that for our health, we need 12 or more hugs survive, 4 to thrive. So I'm going to close. I didn't give you my favorite tip because I ran out of time. Everybody else, you guys stay standing. As we do this transition, you're going to get whatever deficit hug you don't have today to make it up to 12. Go hug. Thank you very much.